Let's talk about a little bit more on how to hit humans. I originally called my series Hitting Humans, but I realized that it doesn't quite explain what's going on, and it's not a way for me to get this to the right audience, which is a younger audience that believes that the world of combat lies within MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and boxing and wrestling. That nothing else exists, and they're as aware of empty open hand blows and pressure points and anatomical attacks as some of us are of quantum physics or jet mechanics or aeronautics. So I'm calling the series How to Hit Humans. All right. And one of my viewers, Complex Blackness, replied to one of my videos where I clearly state that I hit the person with a knife hand, palm up, to the solar plexus. And his response was, I just don't think it's practical to hit the sternum with a palm up knife hand. And I gave him a written reply, but I want to elaborate on it. I didn't hit the sternum. I hit the solar plexus. One of my favorite targets, especially as a younger person. Actually, I'll tell you something. When I pulled that hand back, you got to realize that there was a hook punch, a right-handed hook punch going towards the left temple. And when I pulled back, I wound up in this position, right? Instinctively. And I think I can attribute that to the fact that I just loved Heian Yondan. All right, or Pinan Yondan, it would be called in Okinawan style, right? The fourth kata of Shotokan. I just love that kata, and I just love the way that move felt, and I would just do it over and over again, on my own, and I would do that kata over and over again. And I think that kata is like something you learn high green belt, but I learned all the katas early on. They taught it to me pretty quickly. And I remembered them, and then when my parents pulled me out of that school, I just practiced it on my own because it felt cool, right? It had cool looking stuff in it, but the cool looking stuff was useful. So when I pulled back, I knew that my target was the neck or the throat. And after this guy had thrown his hook punch, he was kind of profiled to me. His right side was facing me, and that knife hand would have hit his throat. Because although, he was looking at me this way, but after the hook, he had kind of turned, and that was open. And in that split second, I'm like, I am not going to chop this guy's throat, right? And so, bam, I hit him in the solar plexus, not the sternum. So Complex Blackness said, I think it would be more practical to use a closed fist on the sternum. Sure. All right, sure. I don't think in a linear weapon like this on a point is a great usage. But the solar plexus, Complex Blackness, solar plexus, although being a point, can be activated from multiple directions and with many different weapons. It can be hit dead on and be activated. I hit that dead on, in a straight line from the outside of the body to in. It can be activated hitting upwards. It's very devastating that way. You can hit upwards at an angle with things like shovel hooks and maybe roundhouse kicks, rising roundhouse kicks. I even believe a proper back fist or backhanded slap to the solar plexus can maybe, if you do it right enough with a whipping impact, you can probably knock the wind out of it. There's a guy Savelli, who demonstrates it on a couple of his videos, and some of the stuff on the videos is kind of woo-woo, but the whip is very sound body mechanics, right? So this goes to a deeper point, anatomy. I think the average martial artist doesn't really understand anatomy, especially nowadays. And you hear it when they talk. They reveal. It's like, how do you reveal that you don't know something without saying that you don't know something? What you do is you say something, and your speech and the assumptions behind it inform the people listening that you don't really there's a few things outside of your knowledge base, right? For instance, I had someone threaten me online. I talked about a sparring session that I was grappling with someone, and he said he was a purple belt, I think, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he was a cop. This was a long time ago. This was early 2000s, right? And I'd always been trained, if someone's grappling with you, grab the groin. As an opening move, not as a finishing move. Grab the groin, rip the eyeballs, bite, throw elbows, hit the throat. That's how I was trained. And I said, I've got you. He goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, I've got your groin in my hand. And he goes, well, I'm wearing a cup. Tap, tap. I'm like, all right. So, we stood up again and we threw some strikes, and he moved in for a takedown. And what I did was I went down the front of his gi and I wiggled my hand down into his pants, and I was trying to find his underwear and get inside that jockstrap and reach down and grab those sweaty balls, give him a squeeze, yank them off, and tear them. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to grab your balls, I'm going to rip them off, and I'm going to swallow them, then I'm going to spit them back in my hand, shove them in your ass, and I'm going to punch you in the stomach until they pop out of your mouth. And he was like, I escalated because his assumption was stupid, okay? The guy's a cop, allegedly working for the public good. He was a Latino cop, so maybe he'd be a little bit less prone to shoot black people, right, or minorities. So allegedly, he could be in a situation where his life is in danger and he needs to know risks. And we stood up and we started sparring again, and he did not want to close into grappling range during that sparring session, right? And afterwards, he's like, if you're ever wrestling with Sensei, don't do that to him. I'm like, you need to go and ask for your money back, dude. That's not a defense. That's not a response to what I did. You need to go back to whoever trained you and ask for your money back, because you don't know one of the most basic things about what happens in a combat situation when you're in grappling range. And someday, you may get killed. Okay? Go back and ask for your money back. You were improperly trained. Grappling range, striking range, weapons range. If you're fighting a human being, you need to understand anatomy. You need to understand, for example, that the knee bends one way and not the other. And if you kick it, all right, it will break one way. Getting back to that story and about anatomy. So I said that story, which is an actual fact, a thing that happened. It just happened. All right. I take my training seriously, and I take my training partners seriously. Someone said, if you did that to me, I'd break every bone in your body. And I'm like, you can't. You do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You're not taught how to break bones. You don't understand how the body works. Every Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and most Japanese Jiu-Jitsu techniques involve hyperextension or even hyperflexion of a joint, right? They can dislocate it or hyperextend it. They can twist it, right? The damage is to soft tissues. However, in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and in ninjutsu and in karate, you have techniques that can break bones. Bones break in the center. This is my radius, that's my ulna. If a hard blow comes here, it doesn't dislocate, it breaks. If I hit here, even if I hit hard enough to break the bone, because the joint is weak, the joint will tear. Ligaments will tear. Cartilage will tear. Tendons, very hard to tear. Those muscles may tear, but usually that's not, impact doesn't cause a muscle to tear. Right? There are reflexes in the body. When you start cranking someone's neck, right, the body has evolved over billions of years of life existing on the planet and encountering things, that kill it before it reproduces. There are reflexes in our nervous system. Some of them have to go to the brain and then back to the body. Some of them can be controlled. You start twisting that spine, that neck, the body starts to move. The message doesn't even get to the brain. It begins to respond at the spinal level, right? Serious, right? The human body is, I don't want to say built, it evolved. I'm not discounting the idea of a god or gods, of a divine being, right? What I'm saying is, in this physical plane, that's how that divine force decided to manifest. It allowed things to evolve. The conditions for evolution, the proof for it are, in my opinion, damn near incontrovertible. There's more proof for evolution than there is, for the time and date of the last 10 times you went to the bathroom. Okay, seriously. So if you're hitting the sternum, right, you aim to do two main things. You aim to have a fast acceleration where the sternum sort of flexes, right? And you aim for a shockwave transference because behind the sternum is the heart. So yes, a closed fist is pretty mighty fine weapon, but believe it or not, if you hit with a palm strike, because you can so confidently hit with a palm strike, if you're not gloved, there have been cases where you hit an adult here, and because in the adult the sternum ossifies, it starts out mostly cartilaginous, and over time, like by the time you're 30, it's mostly bone. It can actually detach, right? And makes it very hard for that individual to function or even breathe. It won't necessarily kill them, but a hard enough blow, a baseball or a baseball bat, and possibly a spinning back kick to the middle of the sternum at the right angle, can kill a person, can cause that heart to stop. Whereas the solar plexus attacks breathing. The front of the Adam's apple in the esophagus region will not only cause a constriction of the muscles in and outside of the throat, causing difficulty breathing, it may actually break that cartilage. You may actually begin to have bleeding, internal bleeding, right? And, your language, you need to pay attention to the language. When you hear doctors, when you hear trauma nurses, I had the privilege of being trained as an EMT when I was in the National Guard. They sent me to the National Guard course, but we also got to ride with actual EMTs in, it was around Pittsburgh, I believe, right? And, you learn about one of the most common ways people die in an ambulance is someone failed to make sure that the airway was clear, right? Or if there was damage, you failed to intubate the person, things like that, right? There's internal bleeding. There's, blood vessels. There's nerve plexus or plexi, you could call them, right? And there's foramen, which is relatively thin areas in the skull. You've got, on the top was a big foramen. That's the last thing to harden as the baby develops, through childhood, right? And there is, where the large bones connect, they're called sutures, right? I remember I had a kid I was training. I was in my 30s, and someone was paying me to, teach his kid private lessons, and he was really upset with me because I was not his type of person. He had been in the Marines, I'd been in the Marines, and I just didn't think the way he did, and he was just upset that I had this knowledge that he wanted, and that I appeared to be content with everything in my life, but I was not him. I didn't think like him. And he just grudgingly paid me the money, and, I don't drive, so I was like, you got to pick me up where I live, and, I lived with my folks at the time. You got to pick me up. And, take me to the lesson, bring me back, and pay me. That's what you got to do if you want this. And I taught the kid a palm strike, right? And the kid was like 12, something like that. And I told him, I said, if people are pushing you, if they're trying to get you to fight, you don't have to fight them. But give them 3 chances. Like if someone pushes you, shoves you, just say stop. First time, say stop. Don't do that, right? If they come at you again, try to, knock the hand aside, say stop. I'll give you one more chance, and then I'm going to hit you. And if they come at you again, just hit them. And I taught him a technique, swat the hand down to come up with a palm strike. It's kind of like in Hungar where you have hungry tiger catches lamb, but it was just palm strike, boom, hit the nose. After you hit him, step back, look around, make sure no one's around you, keep your eye on the person. I mean, this bully had been bullying this kid for months. And he did the technique, pop, hit him in the nose. The kid dropped, was bleeding from the nose. I don't think he broke it. And his dad was like, you got to be careful what you teach my kid. He could have killed the other kid. I'm like, no, he couldn't have. I mean, he could have driven his nose bone through his brain. I'm like, there's no nose bone. It doesn't exist. No, you could. I'm like, no, you can't. You don't know what you're talking about, and I do. You don't know what you're talking about. There is no mythological nose bone. There is nothing. There is a hole in the skull, and there's cartilage. Look, this is cartilage. I know because I've been hit in the nose. Look at this crap. Right? And he literally just didn't know that, and he was having trouble accepting that. Right? It doesn't exist. I'm like, find me an anatomy book. Go on the internet, something. I said, I'll bet you money. You can have this lesson back if you can show me that there's a bone that can detach within the nose and that there's a case of it. If not, you pay me double. He didn't take me up on it. Right. To that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, you couldn't possibly break every bone of my body. You probably couldn't break any bone in my body. You don't know how to punch or kick or even swing a club, maybe. Maybe you've played baseball. Your baseball will be more useful in breaking my bones than your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, if you would have said I'll strangle you unconscious and dislocate all your joints, I'd be like, yeah, it's a little bit more of a credible threat. But otherwise, I'm dealing with someone who doesn't really understand the martial arts and human anatomy, right? Folks, many of you are older martial artists, right? And I know most of my videos are to you, and most of the world doesn't care, doesn't even know that the stuff that we talk about exists. And, I'm just trying to get the message out. But, if I make a mistake and I mislabel something, misattribute something, it is on me. And if I looked at my video, I'm like, well, did I call it a sternum? No. I called it a solar plexus for a particular reason. Number one, that's what I did. That's what I hit with what I hit. Number two, because that's the target to hit if you want to accomplish what I did. If it was a sternum, I have hit a sternum with a palm. And I feel like that's a very efficacious linear weapon for a sternum, as would a side kick, as would an elbow. Most martial artists don't understand anatomy, and they don't use it in their training, and it is in their martial art, but they poorly understand it. Anyway, it's a bit of a rant, but it is a pet peeve of mine. All right.